What's up, everyone? My name is ZayNews, and this is the ZayNews Podcast, where we talk about all things basketball, whether it's the NBA, college hoops, youth sports, you name it. If it's about basketball, then we talk about it. But it is the NBA playoffs, so look no further than the NBA because that is what we're going to be talking about today. So if you like the content, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, engage. Let me know that my takes are trash, or let me know that I'm on point. Whatever it is, I encourage engagement. I want to make a community here where we just talk about the game that we love, which is basketball. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I feel like it's on point to talk about what's currently going on in the NBA playoffs. We are currently in the conference finals. We got the Pacers and the Knicks playing each other. The Knicks currently down 3-1 to the Pacers. And then on the West Coast, we obviously got the Thunder, as of yesterday, wrapping up that series between them and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Really putting belt to you know what and taking it to them. So we'll talk about both of those things to start. I want to talk about the Thunder and Minnesota series first because that series just got wrapped up. And to be honest with you, that series went about as I expected. Now, I did think that series would go six games, but ultimately, I thought the Oklahoma City Thunder were going to be the team to win that series. And the reason being, and I've explained this a few times now, is just that I felt like Oklahoma City was better at what Minnesota did best, right? They were just as physical, just as athletic. They had more depth, and their best player was a better shot creator and shot maker than Minnesota's best player was, right? So when you just, stack up what both teams do well and who does it better, pretty much the Thunder beat them in every single category. So it wasn't much of a surprise to me to see that series go the way it did. Um, the Thunder are tough, man. The Thunder are tough, and they match up well against a lot of teams. And what is interesting about the Thunder is that they can play a lot of different styles, right? They can go more isolation style and allow Shea to work. They can play a more team-oriented game when Shea goes to the bench and everybody's eating. Jalen Williams is a really good creator, and I think that's something that's going to really start to flourish as he solidifies himself more and more in this league, right? Like this year, he was all NBA, all star, all defensive team, right? Like that's going to continue to happen, and he's just going to continue to get more and more comfortable. And when he plays with that second unit, right, like guys are feasting, right? Everybody's getting shots, they're playing really well. So they can play a lot of different ways, and I think that has been evident throughout this playoffs. And you know, they showed us in the regular season who they were, and I think because of lack of star power, we may have doubted them more than we should have. But a team that wins 68 games in a fashion that they won them deserves all of the respect, right? And I don't think it should be a surprise that they're making it to the finals, and should be, to me in my eyes, regardless of what happens in this Eastern Conference Finals, be the team that is favored. Now, you still got to go out and play the games. I think the Pacers at this point do a lot of things similar to OKC, right? They have depth that's similar to them. They can play as a unit. So it should be a fairly interesting series, but I think OKC has earned the right to be the favorite against whatever team they would have played in the finals. And I think even if they would have ran into Boston and Boston, stayed healthy, got to the finals, I think OKC maybe still should have been at least given the credit of what they did in the regular season, right, to be called the favorite in that series. Now, whether they won or not, again, you got to play the games, but I think they just deserve that respect. And piggybacking off of that, right, like I think maybe a lot of people already felt this way. I don't know, but I feel like Shea legitimately solidified himself not only as a top 5 player this season, but currently as the best guard in the NBA. And I think last season I would have said that was Luka. Quite clearly, to be honest with you, I think head to head he proved it. I think he averaged 34-9 or like 33-9 and 9. You know what I'm saying? Like he's ridiculous. His playmaking, that sort of stuff, took him over the edge. But Luka this season dealing with injuries and stuff, trades, obviously regressed a little bit. Shea took another step, and he I think solidified himself as the best guard in the NBA now. Still don't think he's better than Joker. Still don't think he's better than Giannis, but he's that dude in terms of perimeter players in the NBA, and he defends his butt off as well. Now he has a large scoring load, so I won't say he's the best defender in the league or anything like that. But he's a capable defender. He's a good defender. He's not a defender that you can hunt. You know what I'm saying? And if you are hunting him, it's not because he's not a good defender. It's probably because you just want to tire him out on the offensive end of the court, so he can't go at you like he likes to. But he's an exceptional player, man, and I think he deserves all the credit. And I think, at least to me in my eyes, he's like when I'm watching him play, I'm not thinking foul merchant, right? I'm not thinking a guy who's just hunting for calls. I'm thinking of a guy who's trying to get a bucket on you, and he's relentlessly trying to get a bucket on you. And I think the Kobe comparisons and the way that they approach the offensive end of the floor um, is apropos. You know what I'm saying? I think it's fair. Now I don't think he's the same caliber player, and that's a different conversation for a different day. But like I can see what other people see in him, and I'm really starting to see that this year. And the way that he approaches the game, the way he makes his teammates better, what they've done over there in OKC is in large part because of the way that he's progressed and developed as a player. So you got to give your hats off to him. You know what I'm saying? Give your hats off to him because he's definitely earned it. But anyways, that's how I'm feeling about OKC. I think they're the favorites. I think regardless of who they play, which is obviously most likely will be the Indiana Pacers, they deserve to be the favorite. I think the Pacers are unique in that. Well, before we get there, let me transition. Let me transition over to the East, and then we could talk about that matchup. So, in the East, to be honest with you, I was wrong about the series. Now, I said at the beginning of the series that I thought if I was betting with my head as opposed to my heart, that I would pick the Pacers. I thought the Pacers would earn that by the way they played leading into that, the momentum that they had, the chemistry that they have as a unit, deserved to get the nod over the Knicks. And I think heading into the series, if I would have bet with my head, strategically, analytically, I would have picked the Pacers to win the series. But I said these exact words, but I'm going with my heart and I'm going with the Knicks. And the reason I said that is because it would have just been cool to see. I'm not a Knicks fan, but it would have been cool to see, the Knicks in the championship. I think the most interesting series in terms of theater would have been obviously the Knicks versus the Timberwolves after that trade last summer, and just to see how that dynamic played out. But that's besides the point, right? That's besides the point. I said I'm betting with my heart, and I picked the Knicks, and I was wrong. Now, either way, I did say I thought this series was going to go 7 games. I did think that it was going to be highly competitive, and I think these games have showed that. It's just that the Pacers have been a little bit better more consistently than I thought they would. You know what I'm saying? So the Pacers execute really well. And one thing I didn't foresee, and I'm interested to see if you guys feel the same, but I did not foresee Tyrese Haliburton outplaying Jalen Brunson in this series. But he absolutely has, right? And I think that's something that we got to give a nod to. That's not to say that Jalen Brunson hasn't had some big games, but his games have not been as impactful. They haven't been as frequent, and it's showing in the way these games are going, right? Jalen Brunson has not had his imprint on this series like he has in past series. And I think in part of that is due to the Pacers can throw different bodies at him. I think also they prey on the style of play that the Knicks play. You know what I'm saying? Where it's very isolation heavy. It's very one shot heavy when you play isolation basketball, right? You get one shot, you miss it, they're running down the other way. The Pacers, the nature of the Pacers, capitalize on that style of basketball. So you're seeing the Knicks who have one style of play when the shot clock breaks down and when their offense breaks down, it's pick and roll, it's isolation with Jalen Brunson, on a short shot clock. And the Pacers just thrive. You know what I'm saying? They're getting out and running, they're getting easy shots, they're picking the pace up on these guys. And it's just been hard to match that. It's been hard to match that. So I'm impressed with the Pacers. I've made jokes about, them being a fluky team. And if you're being real, you can't lie and say that they've had an abnormal amount of weird wins. Let's put it like that. Weird wins, right? Where it's a comeback late with a historical shooting performance in Neesmith, whether it's a funky looking Tyrese Haliburton game winner. You know what I'm saying? They've had a lot of those. And what that tells me now is just that this team is resilient and they just find ways to win. So I think this series at this point is pretty much a wrap. I don't see the Knicks coming back down from 3-1 for sure. Now, when it was 2-1, I thought, okay, they maybe could make some shake at this point. I think it's a wrap for them. I think the Pacers are too confident. They're too hungry. And they play too hard. You know what I'm saying? They don't let their foot off the gas one bit. Whether they're up by 20, down by 20, they play with the same level of commitment and the same level of hunger throughout that 48 minutes. And that is tough to do. That is very tough to do. It's tough to coach. It's tough to drill into your players. It's tough for your players to conceptualize and understand and commit to. And they seem to do that. And I think if there's anything that you can say negative about the Pacers, one is that they one thing that you can't say negative about the Pacers is that they maximize the talent that they have on that floor. I think it's very clear to say that no one had picked the Pacers to make it to the finals outside of Pacers fans. And the basketball that they've played, even though they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, by the way, I don't think no one really had them going back to the Eastern Conference Finals, let alone making it to the finals. So I think that's just a testament to how that franchise has maximized the guys that they have on the court in a small market, and the best that they've done to build that market, right? Whether it's trading for Tyrese Haliburton, getting rid of Sabonis, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's just been brilliant work, and we're seeing it come to fruition. And might I add that if Rick Carlisle gets a ring in Indiana in that market, he may very well have the two most Cinderella-esque championship runs that we have ever seen, at least in the modern NBA, right? Let's say the past 25 to 30 years. Going back to that Dallas run, no one thought Dallas was going to win with Dirk in 2011. And now here, it makes me want the Pacers to win just for that alone. Rick Carlisle is a guy who is honestly criminally underrated as a coach. And he is showing how valuable he is. I think to players, to coaches, they understand. I think sometimes players probably are a little bit off put by him because it seems like he's kind of, still from that older generation. He's kind of a hard ass, and he, can, drill on guys and be pretty stubborn at times. It seems like, at least from what I've taken from player comments and stuff like that. But man, does he maximize his teams. Man, does he know how to develop a system around his players and not just, stick to what he knows and what he does best, like the other guy on the other side of the aisle from him, Tom Thibodeau, who tends to be more stubborn in his approach, right? Like he's very, very flexible, very versatile as a coach. And if anything, man, I'm thinking if they win, I mean, even if they don't win, you've seen how much they've gotten out of this group over the past 2 years. You got to give your hat up. You got to tip your hat to that guy. But if they do win, you definitely got to tip your hat to that guy because that's an amazing feat. Having two of the most Cinderella runs to the NBA Finals and winning the NBA Finals, quite possibly in NBA history, is just a resume to behold. Shoot, he could retire after this and just, say I'm good. Wash my hands of this. Put me in the Basketball Hall of Fame already, and I think it'd be warranted, absolutely. But anyways, transitioning to the NBA Finals, the potential NBA Finals. Now, I think we all can agree that most likely it'll be the Thunder versus the Pacers. You know what I'm saying? The Thunder already got their bid, and the Pacers play Game 5 tonight. We'll see how that goes, and how that might go. So, I'm inclined to say that I think the series is going to be similar to Minnesota in that it feels to me like the Thunder and Pacers are similar in a lot of ways, and the Thunder are just better in those ways. So, for example, both teams have a lot of depth. I would argue that the Thunder's depth is better. I would argue that the Thunder's depth is more versatile. And I would argue that, just overall at the top of their depth, they are more talented, right? So, Shea's better than Tyrese. Pascal's probably better than Chet, but I think Chet versus Pascal would be an interesting matchup because Pascal hasn't had to deal with that amount of length in like that mid post area that he really likes to operate. So now all of those fadeaways, mid post work that he likes to get to becomes a little bit harder than it has these past couple series. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's an interesting matchup. But I think talent-wise, Chet's probably a little bit more talented because he's 7'2" and can do pretty much all the same stuff that Pascal can. And then, you go down the list, guys like Jalen Williams. I don't know if they got a guy who can match up talent-wise to Jalen Williams. I don't know, Hardenstein at center. Hardenstein first Miles Turner is going to be an interesting one, but I think the physicality that Hardenstein brings will be interesting for the Pacers. And then, you go depth for depth. It's interesting. So, my initial inkling is that these teams are similar. They play the right way. They get a lot of guys involved. They play with depth. They play with pace. They get up and down the court. But that the Oklahoma City Thunder do it better. And also that when these games start to come down to the wire, the Thunder probably have the best ace in the hole in the league. And in SGA. You know what I'm saying? A guy who can get his shot whenever he wants, a guy who's going to be efficient with the shots that he does get, and a guy who's 6'6", who is not, 6'2" Jalen Brunson, but he's 6'6", and um, all that physicality. Even though Jalen Brunson is great at, getting foul calls and making guys honest on the defensive end of the floor, Shea's just a little bit better. You know what I'm saying? Shea's just a little bit better. He's a little bit bigger, and their team's just more depth, a little bit better, a little bit more talented than the Knicks were. So for that reason, I'm picking the Thunder to win this series, but I want to give proper respect to the Pacers. So I'd say, top of my head, let's go Thunder in 6. Now, these games still got to be played, and the Pacers are literally the hottest team in the NBA right now. From where they started at the beginning of the playoffs to where they are now, I think you have to agree with that. Like, it's more with the Thunder, it's more like this is what you were supposed to do. You won 68 games. With the Pacers, it's like we're playing with house money more so than that. So I think I say all that to say, right, the games still have to be played. And the Pacers have found something in the roster that they have. And one thing I know for sure, that they are going to compete their tails off. They're going to play extremely hard. They're going to be extremely physical. They are going to be extremely resilient, and they are going to put their best foot forward. With that, I have no doubt. So I think it's going to be a great series. I think it's going to be must-see TV. And even though these aren't the biggest markets, if you are a basketball fan, this should be a series that you should want to see. And honestly, I said this even before the series started. I know a lot of Knicks fans are going to be disappointed that their team didn't make it. The Pacers have a better chance of making this a series than the Knicks did. If we're all just going to be honest, I think similar to how this Pacers versus Knicks series is playing out, let's say, it didn't play out this way and, someone on the Pacers got hurt or something and the Knicks found a way to win or what have you, knock on wood, because I don't want to see that happen. But the Knicks found a way to get through. Seeing how this series played out with them and the Pacers, I think it would just happen to them the same way in the finals, just magnified, because now you're just playing against a better team, in my opinion, right? So, it is what it is. They're a good team, and I think they had some good matchups along the way. Specifically in meeting Boston, what they did, I think they prepared all season to play Boston, and they were foreseeing Boston as their roadblock to the championship. So they definitely, overachieved, I'd say. But with that said, we saw a lot of flaws in this Knicks team throughout the season, right? Their lack of defense, you know what I'm saying? Their default offense in watching Jalen Brunson just work with the ball and not having enough continuity on offense, not having enough movement on offense, consistently not getting Cat involved enough, in the mid to low post and making him more of a perimeter scorer at times, are all things that we've seen and are all things that are, biting them in the butt this series, to be honest with you. So it just is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is. I think it's wrong for us to expect more from a team when they showed us who they are all season, right? These guys have already overachieved. I think we give them a pat on the back. I think they had a good season. I think there's some changes that they can make in the offseason. I think there are some coaching changes that could be made throughout the course of a regular season, so they're not so Jalen Brunson dependent on offense, because they have a lot of offensive talent. Improving their depth so that they play more depth all 82 games, not just in the playoffs when they feel like they need to make an adjustment, I think are all things that they can work on going into the next season. And they're still, all their guys are still in their 20s. So, they're a young team, a youngish team. And, you make a few moves, you get more bench help, and you get more guys on the bench that you can trust and play consistently, and a little bit more schemes on offense. I think they're going to be right back here next year. You know what I'm saying? At least in the hunt, right back in the hunt next year, being competitive. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. But, okay, I want to move on, and I want to talk about something that my homeboy brought up yesterday. Yeah, my homeboy brought this up yesterday, and when he brought it up, I was like, I stamped that. You know what I'm saying? That's something that I can co-sign, because I definitely agree with it. And I started to think about it, and I started to kind of expand my perspective on it. So what it was is that, one of the common themes and narratives that gets pushed into playoffs when we're watching series is that if a team is losing, the coach is getting out coached and they're not making enough adjustments. This is common between fans, between media. You go look through comments, you look at media reporting on it and dropping videos on ESPN, all that sort of stuff. And they say this quite regularly. But what you don't hear regularly is what adjustments need to be made. So I think something that we need to start considering is when somebody tells us or when somebody criticizes a coach for not making enough adjustments, let's start asking them what specific adjustments need to be made in order for this team to turn around, whatever playoff woes that they're having. Because the reality is, and what I'm realizing is, people say they watch the games, but I'm not sure if they're actually seeing what's happening during these games. And let me expand on that and give you the perfect example. Tom Thibodeau right now may be making more adjustments in this series than he quite literally ever has had in his entire coaching career. And I'm not just saying that to be eye popping and try and get you to listen. This is serious. Now, Tom Thibodeau playing 8 players is a stretch for him. Typically, he played 8 players the first 2 games of the series. Now, you tell me, if you win game 1 of a series, or excuse me, if you lose game 1 of a series, the manner in which the Knicks lost game 1 of the series, it was a heartbreaker, but in reality, they were winning 99% of that game down to like the final 4 minutes. They had an all-time internal explosion where they just crumbled. I don't know what happened. They crumbled. But also, the Pacers went and took it from them, right? So they just didn't do what they needed to do. A lot of things transpired to where they ended up losing the game. They were up by like 14 and lost it in 4 minutes. Now, as a coach, do you overreact to that and make a ton of changes and quite possibly panic your team? Or do you say, you know what, guys? We were winning that game. We were winning that game convincingly. Outside of those last 4 minutes, we were the better team on the court. And we just, an anomaly happened and we wound up losing. Now, I think most coaches would go that route because they don't want to stir the pot. They don't want their team to feel that they've lost confidence in them, because that's a rare occurrence. You know what I'm saying? So I think personally, Thibodeau was right not to make that many adjustments from game 1 to game 2 and see how it played out. Because if they're in the same scenario in game 2 up 14, I bet he would be confident that they wouldn't lose that game again. You know what I'm saying? So with that said, didn't make a lot of adjustments game 2, but they go into game 2, they lose game 2. From game 2 on, if you say he didn't make a lot of adjustments, I'm convinced that you just don't watch basketball. So let's go down the list. First things first, he did what seems to be a sin to his coaching style, and he went 10 deep in a playoff game in game 3. Games 3 and 4, but we're talking about game 3. Not to mention all of the internal adjustments that they made, whether it was different coverages that they're throwing at Haliburton and Pascal. That's the game that Pascal got off, by the way. Slowing the rock down, playing more isolation basketball, whatever it is, right? They made a lot of offensive and defensive adjustments as well. But if you can't catch those things, then that's on you. But you can't just say the coach didn't make any adjustments when it's on tape, it's on the film that they indeed did. And that's what the series has been about, right? If you go down the list, the pacing of games has changed, right? Game 1 was a very high-paced game that catered to the Pacers, right? And the Knicks almost won that game. Since that, games have been played at a slower pace. I'm seeing games in the middle of the fourth quarter in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? That's all due to both teams on both sides making small adjustments and then the games playing out in different ways, right? If you played the game the same way every game, the scoring is going to be similar. The pacing is going to be similar. The possession amounts are going to be similar. You know what I'm saying? All these things are going to be very, very similar. And there's been different stories being written in all these games because of the adjustments that are being made. So watch the games. And if you're going to criticize a coach, criticize them for what's actually happening and not just what you think's happening based on prior opinions that you formed. You feel me? And not to mention, when you go into game 4, even more adjustments were made, right? Like moving Josh Hart onto the bench, starting Mitchell Robinson. That may not sound like much because people killed me when I mentioned this on TikTok, that he still played 36 minutes. Okay, he's one of their most important players. He should play 36 minutes. But the timing of when players play matters, right? Bringing Josh Hart off the bench, having him play more against second units. Maybe he can be more effective there. Maybe starting Mitchell Robinson gets guys in foul trouble because he's going to attack the offensive glass. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to be aggressive on defense. You know what I'm saying? This all gives different looks at different times, and that can really affect the flow of a game. So to say that Thibodeau is not making adjustments in a series where he might as well be making more adjustments than he ever has made is just ludicrous. Now, if you are going to criticize Thibodeau, which I think is warranted, right? I think him as a coach, historically, this season included, everybody deserves criticism and everybody can be pointed to. But I think the criticism lies more in what they did in the 82 game regular season as opposed to what they've done in the playoffs. Because the reality is they've overperformed in the playoffs. They ran into a tough team in the Pacers, and their play style just hasn't been successful, right? I mean, and if we're being honest, this series could as easily be 2-2 as it is, 3-1. So let's be real there. But with that being said, I think the criticism comes from what they did games, the 82 game regular season. And for me, it's just that, they're not as flexible of a team in that they can't play enough different styles of basketball, and they tend to be very Jalen Brunson heavy. You know what I'm saying? I would like to see personally out of the Knicks more continuity in their offense. I think Anunoby and Mikal Bridges are exceptional talents, especially to have as role players. And, the fact that there's not enough, flow in their offense for them to consistently get going. One game Anunoby might have 8 points, another game he might have 20 points. It's just a lot of fluidity there. And that can be common for role players, but to be honest with you, I think they could do a better job of having more consistency in their offense so that their offense is just more free flowing and it's less reliant on Jalen Brunson just making plays. You know what I'm saying? Less reliant on him dribbling the ball at the top of the key. So I think that's one area where they could have improved. And obviously, even though their defense has been much better in the playoffs, they didn't play defense for 90% of the NBA season. So I don't think they reached their peak defensively as a team. It can be tough when you got two guys out there who are not great defenders in Cat and Jalen Brunson. But with that said, working on your defensive cornerstones and philosophies, and fine tuning those, and just finding rotations that cater to those, I think are all things that they could do better for next season. So I think that's where the criticism lies. That's my point. I think that's where the criticism lies. It's in what they did games, in the regular season games more so than it's what they've done in the playoffs. Us expecting a team to play out of their body and go 180 degrees in the other direction and make all these changes, one, isn't realistic, right? It's just not going to happen in a playoff series. You're going to do what got you to the dance to the most part, and then you make adjustments along those those smaller lines where you can that can have a real big effect, but aren't going to necessarily change your entire identity. And I think because people can't necessarily see the game as it's happening, they have a tough time understanding that, right, and conceptualizing what these changes are doing and when they're happening. So just something to consider. I didn't mean to go off on a rant there, but just something to consider because this series especially, right, like I've been watching it and it's just like he's not to blame. You know what I'm saying? Thibodeau is not to blame. The adjustments being made on the court aren't to blame. Now, that's not to say that if you think he's being outcoached by Rick Carlisle, that's okay. Rick Carlisle's a better coach. Rick Carlisle, when it comes to basketball strategy and stuff, Rick Carlisle is a better coach. Maybe he's not a better galvanizer. I don't know. I'm not in those locker rooms. Maybe he's not a better chemistry guy. I don't know. I'm not in those locker rooms. But in terms of what's happening on the court, the adjustments to be made, the chess games that are being played on the basketball court, Rick Carlisle is just a better coach. So yeah, he's getting outcoached, I guess you could say that. But we should have known that was going to happen going in. You know what I'm saying? We should have known. But anyways, I'll move on. And this is the last thing I wanted to touch on today, and that's just the summer's free agency. So I'm telling you guys, I said it before, get ready because this summer's free agency quite possibly has potential to be one of the craziest free agencies that we have ever seen in NBA. You know what I'm saying? When you're talking about guys like Giannis, when you're talking about guys like Trae Young who might get moved, who knows? Now he has been a franchise guy, but who knows? I heard last thing that Zion and the Pelicans are on a good page, but you start playing around with offers for him, what might happen there. Really, we just don't know what's going to happen. And I think one thing that has the potential of happening is the Giannis trade being so big, if he does end up getting moved, that it stalls some stuff. But if he does get moved, and if he does get moved quick, man, start talking about things just moving. You know what I'm saying? Things just being lit on fire and things really moving. So I'm excited to see that. And then you even go to teams like Philly. Like, what's Philly going to do? Are they just going to run it back and say, we weren't healthy. Let's give it a go and see what happens when Paul George and Embiid are healthy on the court together? They could. I mean, I don't think they got a fair shake last year. But also, would you be surprised if they shopped Paul George? Would you be surprised if they shopped Embiid? Now, the only reason I would be surprised if they shopped Embiid is because Embiid right now is probably at his lowest return value. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe you let him play until All-Star break and then you look to shop him just so, especially if he's healthy, just so you can, like, sell him again and show, his MVP stature. But if not, they might be looking to make some moves. LA is definitely looking to sign some people in the offseason. So I'm excited to see how the offseason really shakes out. I really think it's going to be a fun one to watch, and I can't wait for it. So, man, tell me what you guys think. Tell me what trades you would like to see. But don't just tell me like the fantasy trades. Tell me some realistic trades or signings or anything of that nature that you think is realistic and might happen. I'm a Lakers fan, and I understand why people think Lakers fans are so delusional. Because some of the trades that I've seen proposed by Lakers fans, it's just like, why would the other team do that? Like, everybody wants to get Walker Kessler, for example. Why would Utah take Dalton Connect and a first round pick swap for Walker Kessler? I don't know. He's 24. He has potential to be, like a top 10 center in the league. Why? You know what I'm saying? Jared Allen. Why would Cleveland trade him for Rui and picks? You know what I'm saying? Why would they do that? They just won 64 games. Give me some realistic trades that could potentially happen. This is why I mentioned Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is a guy who underproduces in the playoffs, and he is also a guy who is going to be overpaid by about $20 million by the time he's 35, 36, because he is 32, about to be 33 right now. And he's on like a $40 million a year contract. Now the contract does go down. They restructured his deal so that he gets paid less year over year, and he's getting his money in the front end. So that helps like Minnesota, but still, I say Rudy Gobert because I know we are going to have to overpay for a center, right? So for us, we'd be able to trade like Rui, Gabe, and Jared Vanderbilt. Those are three contracts that would get us to Rui or Rudy, excuse me. And one, Minnesota would get expiring contracts. Two, Minnesota just lost in the Western Conference Finals twice in a row. I imagine with the free agency pending of Julius Randle and Naz Reid, they're going to want to sign those guys back, but they're also going to want to make some changes. Where is the smartest change to make, right? Would you rather let Naz Reid walk? Would you rather let Nickeil Alexander-Walker walk? Or would you rather let the aging center and Rudy Gobert walk? Now, Rudy Gobert is a great player. He's one of the best defensive players of this generation. I truly believe that. I think the criticism he gets is largely unwarranted and uneducated, but he's still an aging center whose value and whose production reduces in the playoffs. That's a guy who I could see the Lakers getting because they will assuredly have to overpay for him during a trade. You know what I'm saying? So give me your thoughts. Give me some trades, some realistic scenarios that you think could happen over the course of the summer, whether it's for your team, whether it's for another team, right? Even Miami might have to make some moves. I want to hear these. I want to hear what people think because I think it's going to be a crazy, crazy summer, and I'm really excited for it. Man, when NBA free, so we got to go through this lull, where nothing's happening. Might as well have some trades happening. You know what I'm saying? Might as well have some trades happening. Might as well have some stuff moving, something that keeps basketball at the top of mind, because when there's no basketball, it's lame. It's boring. You guys can agree with that. So hopefully some crazy stuff happens. But anyways, it's been a pleasure, guys. As always, if you like the content, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. The likes, the subscriptions, the engagement, the comments, all of it, it really helps the channel grow. and it helps me continue to just provide videos for you guys. If there's topics that you think that I didn't cover that you want to hear about, leave a comment and let me know. I'm happy to touch on any topics that you guys want to touch on. Really, I'm just trying to grow this thing. I'm trying to grow this thing so that I can talk about basketball to people who, on the other end, really are passionate about basketball the same way that I am. So appreciate you guys as always, and I'll look forward to the next one. Peace.